It would seem that games are going to be a bit shorter in the new edition of 40k, with the standard game length now being just 5 turns. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel where we've been covering the 9th edition news as it's been coming out. Just a quick one today that Games Workshop let drop in a recent article focused on the Genestealer cult, that games of 40k in 9th edition will now be 5 turns, as opposed to the slightly more random and longer 5 to 7 turns that they had at the start of 8th, so let's see what they said. So, from the Genestealer cult article, it says this combined with the extra command point per turn means that over the standard new edition game length of 5 battle rounds, you'll have at least 17 command points in a game. So when we get to see the full rules for the new missions, I expect that they will have 5 rounds as the standard default, although of course there's nothing to stop you from saying yes, we'll just play a 6 or 7 round mission this time to do something different. I honestly expect that most people will just play the ones out of the book though, and go for this new 5 turn mission length. The first thing to note about this is that random game length is now almost certainly gone. You can't really have a standard game length of 5 if you have a random game finish time. Now it seems that when we start the game, we know that we're going to be getting 5 turns, so it means that we know that our plans have to come to fruition by 5 turns, rather than trying to gamble a bit and hedge our bets based on the game length. In general, I think a fixed turn length for the game is actually probably better for balance and competitive play, as it just removes a factor of randomness from the game. If your battle plan allows you to be ahead on turns 5 and turn 6, then it's a bit unfortunate and unlucky for you if the game randomly lasts to turn 7, which wasn't odds on to happen, and your opponent takes the entire win as a result. In games that are coming absolutely down to the wire, literally the roll of the endgame dice could decide who wins and loses, and it wasn't a roll that had any skill or determinants by the players themselves, so it could often feel a bit cheap when someone just randomly happens to win the game, and literally the only deciding factor was that 50-50 dice roll for whether or not the game would end. Now if everyone's clear that the game is 5 turns long, then that random factor is removed, and you won't have the situation of people saying, yes, I would have won if it was turn 6 or turn 7 but the game ended turn 5, that sort of thing. I will admit that this does lose a bit of the fun factor though. I think it was quite dramatic whenever you rolled the dice to the end of the game, particularly when it was close, in a quite similar way to how Seize the Initiative is very dramatic, but maybe not the most balanced mechanic in the world. On a generally positive note, a 5-turn game will likely be a little bit quicker to finish than a turn 6 or 7 one, and in general having less time pressures to finish a game of 40k is a good thing, though I will say unless your game was fairly close then turn 6 or 7 did tend to be pretty quick anyway. There don't tend to be very many units left on the table by that point, and you sort of know that there's no real point in just going after certain kills. The only thing that matters at this point is trying to get the last few victory points before the game ends. Typically if you wanted to, you could often just talk out the results of turn 6 or 7 if time was an issue. Obviously the downside of having a shorter game though with fewer turns is that in many games you will remove a last turn of meaningful tactics if both players do have a decent amount of units alive into the late game, which doesn't always happen. Sometimes someone almost tables someone in the first few turns of 40k, but if both armies have reasonable chunks of their armies left, then you will be playing very slightly less game than you would have been otherwise, as the guaranteed last turn of the game, turn 5 will now be the turn that's seen as a bit meaningless. Often it won't matter at all whether you kill any enemy units or anything, you may as well just move on to objectives and call the game done. Before turn 5 would matter quite a lot, as any damage that you could deal to your enemy troops might mean that you have more chance of scoring victory points, say in turn 6 or 7. In terms of impact to the actual units and playstyles within the game, I think when combined with progressive objective scoring, basically when you score one objective at the end of each turn or something similar, then this change means that you can't afford to castle up quite as much as you could before. Say if you were playing a very typical gunline castle type list, such as Imperial Fists with a whole load of artillery hiding at the back of the board for a few turns, you might often be able to destroy the opponent's army from a long way away, and then move over for the last few turns to get some objective scoring to help you win the objectives game. Now basically if it takes your army about 3 turns to destroy the opponent's army on average, you're only going to be getting 2 turns of free objective capturing, rather than the 3 or 4 that you might have had in 8th. Having a shorter game length with progressive objectives that are scored each turn really means that armies are going to have to get stuck in a little bit more and actually move into the centre of the board and try and fight for those early game points. I think for the most part that's a positive, as it makes the game a fair bit more interactive and potentially makes melee a bit more useful as well, particularly in the earlier game. I'm certainly not saying that you can't do gunline castle type strategies, I'm sure that will still be very effective as normal, but you're going to be a bit more squeezed for victory points if you make literally no effort to capture objectives for the first 2 or 3 turns of the game. I think you could also see this as a small buff to fast moving units or units that have reserve mechanics that can deep strike, and perhaps a slight nerf to slower moving units as a result. In 5 turns you're basically going to be able to cover less of the table than you were before anyway, meaning that potentially slow moving units, if they have to take a turn or 2 fighting in combat or something, might really struggle to make it to objectives in the back of the enemy's field, or if they do, they might only be able to score the objective for 1 turn before the game's over anyway. so I think fast moving units will be a little bit more valuable in a 5-turn game than in a 6 or 7-turn one. Finally, this sentence also pretty much doubly confirms the fact that command points are 1 per battle round and not per player turn, as I had quite a lot of people trying to tell me in the comments. So if you do manage to field an army in just 1 detachment, then it looks like you'll be getting 12 points for the initial command points, and then also another 5 throughout the game for a total of 17, although the ones generated on turns 4 and 5 might not have quite as much use, as the game's likely going to be winding down a bit. So let me know what you think of the new game change. I'm pretty on board with it myself. I think it will be interesting to see if it really does encourage people to get stuck in earlier compared with holding back. In general though, I feel like losing random game length at least was probably a good thing for game balance. It was something that had already been done with more competitive tournaments such as the ITC for quite a while now. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Allspec Tactics for more 40k tactics related content every day. And if you've been watching the videos a lot, I'd just like to mention that the channel has a Patreon page, which is how I have quite so much time to make videos about model soldiers. If you are watching regularly, then any support is most greatly appreciated. Channel patrons also get to see videos early, there's regular polls on what sort of things come next for the channel, and there's also monthly prize draws, where next month we'll be giving away 3 copies of the Indomitus box. If any of that interests you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.